So if you open up Homer's Odyssey and just, look at the culinary descriptions, you might honestly come away thinking that Bronze Age Greece was essentially this chaotic, magical fever dream of a restaurant.
Oh, absolutely. It's wild.
Right. I mean, on one page, Odysseus and his crew are desperately trying to escape the island of the Lotus Eaters.
Yeah.
And the locals there are just munching on these highly addictive, narcotic lotus plants that make you completely forget your own home.
Yeah, it's not exactly a standard farm-to-table setup.
Not at all. And then, just a few chapters later, you run into the sorceress Circe. She welcomes his men in and casually whips up this terrifying potion.
Right, the famous potion.
Yeah, it's got, barley meal, honey, cheese, wine, and then this heavy dose of pharmacon, which is just this magical drug.
Right.
And naturally, if you drink it, you turn into a pig.
Which is definitely not a menu item you're going to find at your local neighborhood cafe.
No, I really hope not.
The food in Homer's work, it is incredibly dramatic, it's highly symbolic, and for the most part, it's just entirely mythical.
But if you put the poetry aside and actually dig into the dirt of 1200 BCE, you don't find magical cheese potions. You find a reality that is shockingly familiar to us.
Yeah, much more grounded.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because assuming Bronze Age people actually walked around drinking Circe's pig-transforming potion for lunch is kind of like, well, it's like future historians digging up our civilization thousands of years from now and assuming our everyday diet consisted entirely of, the magical levitating candy from Harry Potter.
That is a great way to look at it.
So our mission for this deep dive today is to look at the sources and uncover what real people were actually pulling out of the ground and putting on their plates, while these epic myths were supposedly happening right in their backyards.
I love that framing, because when you strip away the monsters and the magic, the reality of the Bronze Age diet it's far more grounded and, frankly, I think a lot more interesting.
Really? More interesting than turning into a pig?
Nutritionally speaking, yes. The diets of everyday people around 1200 BCE were incredibly basic. They were simple, and they were deeply, deeply nourishing.
Okay.
And what's fascinating here is that we're essentially looking at the ancient bedrock of the Mediterranean diet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, the staples they relied on over 3,000 years ago are the exact same foods that modern science now heavily links to long-term health, cardiovascular strength, and longevity for you today.
Which is just wild to think about. We spend so much time today trying to biohack our way to a longer life, taking all these supplements and meticulously tracking macros.
Right, buying all sorts of powders.
Exactly. And the blueprint was just sitting there in the Bronze Age the whole time, sort of hiding beneath all the stories of Cyclops and sirens.
It really was.
But to really understand the reality of that Bronze Age plate, I think we have to start by debunking probably the biggest dietary lie Homer told in the Odyssey.
Yes.
And that is his absolute, undeniable obsession with meat.
The sheer volume of roasted animal flesh in Homer's work is just staggering.
It's everywhere.
If you read the text, Odysseus and the various kings and suitors he encounters, they are constantly devouring entire roasted sheep.
Massive cuts of mutton, yeah.
Right, and endless platters of beef. It reads like an ancient all-you-can-eat steakhouse.
But that wasn't the reality.
No, the historical reality is that in 1200 BCE, meat was incredibly rare for the average person. It was not a daily staple. For most people, it barely even qualified as a monthly staple.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit, or at least just ask the obvious question here. If meat was actually that rare in real life, why is Homer writing about it nonstop?
What?
Was this just the ancient equivalent of flexing your wealth on social media? Like someone today posing in front of a private jet they only rented for an hour just for the photo?
Honestly, that is
No.
a highly accurate analogy. Yeah, meat was a massive luxury. So describing these endless, lavish feasts of beef and lamb is basically a literary device. It was designed to show the audience just how outrageously wealthy, powerful, and favored by the gods these specific characters were.
Oh, okay, so it's all about status.
Entirely. To understand why meat was so rare for normal people, you have to look at the agricultural economics of the time. Let's take cows, for example.
Okay, gals.
Cows were astronomically expensive to keep, but, they weren't valued for their beef at all. In the Bronze Age, a cow was essentially your tractor.
Oh, right. Because the terrain in Greece is notoriously rocky and hard to farm, right?
Precisely.
You'd need some serious muscle to turn that soil over.
You need that massive, powerful animal to pull a heavy wooden plow through unforgiving rocky earth. If you eat the cow...
You can't farm your land.
Exactly. And if you can't farm your land, you can't grow your crops, which means you and your entire family starve when winter hits.
Wow, so the stakes are incredibly high.
They are. So you would only eat a cow when it was absolutely necessary, or during incredibly special feasts that almost always followed a major ritual sacrifice to the gods.
Making it a religious event.
Right. You're offering the life of this immensely valuable, labor-producing animal to the divine, and then the community shares the meat as this rare, sacred event.
I always just assumed they were casually barbecuing on a Tuesday.
Not even close.
But what about sheep? Because Homer talks about lamb all the time, and a sheep definitely isn't pulling a plow through rocky soil.
That's true. Sheep and goats were certainly more common to eat than cows, but even then, slaughtering a young lamb was considered a huge financial loss.
Because of the wool.
Exactly. Those animals were far more valuable alive than dead because of what they produced over their entire lifespan. A sheep provides wool, which is an absolute necessity for clothing and a really crucial good for trade.
Right.
And both sheep and goats provide milk. You want to keep them alive as long as possible to harvest those renewable resources year after year.
So if you were an everyday person in the Bronze Age, your diet was never anchored by a giant roast.
No, never.
Yeah.
It was anchored by grains.
The ultimate ancient carb load.
Exactly. Bread and grains were the true foundation of the plate, and they were served at almost every single meal. But this is also where we see social class really clearly dictating what went into your body.
How so?
Well, wealthier families had access to refined wheat flour. They had the resources to essentially sift out the tough bran, meaning they were eating much softer, more desirable bread.
Okay, so if the wealthy are eating this nice, soft wheat bread, what are the poorer farming families eating?
They relied heavily on barley, which was usually boiled down into porridge.
Porridge, nice.
Yeah, barley's a lot tougher, but it grows much easier in poor soil. So porridge was filling, it was cheap, and you could stretch a really small amount of grain with water to feed a very large family.
Makes sense.
And alongside that porridge, lentils were an absolute daily staple.
Lentil.
Yes, a crucial, cheap source of protein and fiber. And the mechanism of cooking them was simple, but really effective. They would boil the lentils down slowly for hours into these thick, heavy soups.
To break them down.
Right, breaking down the tough fibers so their bodies could actually absorb the nutrients efficiently.
Okay, so let's follow the logic here for a second. If everyday people can't afford to feast on beef and lamb, and they're mostly relying on, like, barley porridge and lentil soup,
right,
how are they getting the rest of their protein? I mean, where is the dense caloric energy coming from to sustain them, especially when they are doing intense physical labor all day long?
That is a great question. And the answer lies in how they adapted to their immediate environment. You have to remember the Mycenaean civilization
Is the dominant Greek culture we're talking about here.
Yes, the one that thrived right before the Bronze Age system collapsed around 1200 BCE. They were heavily coastal. They were spread out across these rocky peninsulas and small islands.
Oh, so they went to the sea.
Exactly. Since the land was so tough for large livestock, they naturally turned to the water. Archaeological evidence from these settlements shows a massive, massive reliance on seafood.
The sources mention they were catching fish like grouper, sea bass, and mullet.
Yes, lots of coastal fish.
But I was wondering, how do you manage a massive catch of fish in a really hot Mediterranean climate without modern refrigeration?
Yeah.
Like, I assume they couldn't just eat it all fresh off the boat before it's spoiled.
Oh, they definitely couldn't. And that's where the chemical process of preservation becomes the absolute bedrock of their survival.
Okay.
They were salting and drying the fish in the sun. By coating the fresh fish in sea salt, they were drawing out the moisture through a process of osmosis.
Right, because bacteria need water to thrive and multiply.
Exactly. So by aggressively pulling the water out of the fish's flesh, they created an environment where bacteria simply couldn't survive.
Oh.
This allowed them to build up a preserved, shelf-stable pantry of dense protein that could last for months, even through the winter.
That makes total sense. You eliminate the water, you eliminate the rot.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me to a part of the research I really want you to unpack for me.
Oh, sure.
We talk about how they kept sheep and goats alive for their milk, right?
Yes.
But liquid milk spoils incredibly fast in the heat.
Faster than fish, in some cases.
Exactly. So they had to preserve that too. And this brings us right back to the Odyssey. But this time, Homer's myth actually matches this historical reality perfectly.
Ah, I know where you're going. You're talking about the Cyclops.
Yes, the Cyclops, Polyphemus. So Odysseus and his men get trapped in his cave, and before the whole horrific, eye-gouging escape sequence happens,
Which is pretty intense.
very intense. But Homer actually takes the time to describe Polyphemus' setup in detail. The characters literally watch him aging sheep and goat milk cheese in these woven wicker baskets.
Yes, they do.
According to Greek myth, this giant, terrifying monster was the first being to ever make cheese.
It's incredible.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Polyphemus wasn't just a man-eating monster. He was basically the ancient world's first artisanal Brooklyn cheesemaker, just, with one eye and a terrible temper. He was demonstrating the exact chemical preservation technique that kept Bronze Age farmers alive.
It's such a brilliant literary detail, and you're right, it's entirely rooted in the everyday science of the Bronze Age. The method Homer describes the Cyclops using is virtually unchanged in traditional cheesemaking today.
Really? Unchanged?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
The ancient Greeks needed a way to solidify milk to keep it from spoiling, and they discovered this largely by accident through the use of rennet.
Wait, what exactly is rennet in this context?
So rennet is a complex of enzymes. Before pottery and glass were widely available or, easily transportable, nomadic people would often store liquids in bags made from the dried stomachs of ruminant animals.
Like sheep or calves?
Exactly. Those stomachs naturally contain an enzyme called chymosin, which helps young animals digest their mother's milk.
Oh, I see.
So when the ancient Greeks stored fresh milk in these stomach bags, the leftover enzymes would react with the milk proteins. This caused the liquid to curdle and separate into solid curds and liquid whey.
Okay, that is simultaneously disgusting and incredibly ingenious.
It's pure survival chemistry. Once they had those solid curds, they would pack them into wicker baskets to let the moisture drain out.
Just like Polyphemus did.
Exactly like Polyphemus. Then, to preserve it long term, they submerged the cheese blocks in a heavy brine of salt and water.
Which is literally the exact recipe for feta cheese.
It is. The nutritional profile, the enzymatic curdling, and the brining method are identical to real feta. Brining the cheese allowed them to store dairy for incredibly long periods without a refrigerator.
Wow.
It was a brilliant survival mechanism that eventually turned into a cultural cornerstone. In fact, this ancient tradition is so deeply tied to the Greek landscape that it sparked a massive modern legal war.
A legal war over cheese.
Oh, yeah. In 2005, Greece won a long, drawn-out fight in the European Union to permanently establish authentic feta as a protected designation of origin.
Oh, meaning legally true feta can only be from there.
Exactly. True feta has to be a cheese made solely in specific regions of Greece, using those ancient ratios of sheep and goat milk.
That is amazing. So every time you crumble real feta on a salad today, you are essentially eating the exact same preserved protein that sustained a Bronze Age farmer. I love that.
It's a direct link to the past.
Okay, so we have this diet that is extremely savory, very salty, and highly preserved.
Yeah.
You've got the salted fish, the brine feta, the lentil stews. It begs the question, what about their sweet tooth?
Ah, sweets.
Yeah, how did they satisfy a craving for sweets in a world that didn't have a single grain of refined sugar?
Well, the short answer is that the concept of dessert, as a distinct, heavy, sugar-laden course at the end of a meal, it simply didn't exist in ancient Greece.
No dessert at all.
No. Their palate wasn't hijacked by the ultra-processed sugars you see in modern grocery stores. But, human beings are biologically hardwired to crave sweetness because it signals dense, safe energy.
Right, our brains want the calorie.
Exactly. And since they had no sugarcane, their only true, intensely concentrated sweetener was honey.
The sources point out that a typical sweet treat for them was honestly just a piece of sharp cheese or some fruit, heavily doused in honey.
That was the peak of sweetness.
But they also used honey extensively in their medicines. I'm curious about the mechanism there. If honey was used as medicine, does that mean they viewed their sweet treats as genuinely good for them, unlike our modern guilt over eating a candy bar? Did they just think, this tastes good, so it must heal me?
It was actually much more empirical than that. They could physically see the results of using it. Honey is a biological marvel. First, much like the salted fish we talked about, honey has an incredibly low water content.
Which means bacteria simply cannot grow in it.
Precisely. Second, it's slightly acidic, and it naturally produces trace amounts of hydrogen peroxide.
Wait, really? So it literally is an antibacterial ointment?
It literally is. They would apply it to wounds to prevent infection, and they would ingest it to soothe throat inflammation or coughs.
That's incredible.
Furthermore, it's pure, unadulterated glucose and fructose, meaning it bypasses a lot of the usual digestive process and absorbs straight into the bloodstream. It provides immediate energy.
Boom, instant fuel.
Exactly. So to them, a honey-soaked piece of cheese wasn't a guilty, calorie-dense cheat meal. It was a vital, restorative substance. It was seen as a gift from nature that provided life and vitality.
That completely flips our modern guilt over eating sweets on its head. Now, you mentioned fruit, and I want to bring up figs because looking at the sources, they seem to be the absolute heavyweights of the ancient produce section.
Oh, what's fascinating here is just the massive cultural weight of the fig. They were the undisputed king of Bronze Age fruits.
Everyone ate them.
Absolutely everyone, crossing all social classes. From the poorest farmer eating barley porridge to the wealthiest king eating a sacrificed beef roast, everybody ate figs.
And I'm guessing this comes back to survival mechanics again.
You guessed it. Much like the salted fish and the brine cheese, figs could be dried in the sun and preserved for months. As they dry, their natural sugars concentrate, creating this highly stable, calorie-dense safety net for surviving the harsh winter months when fresh food was completely unavailable.
They were so highly valued that they were actually given as prizes to the winners of the early Olympic Games.
They were.
Imagine training your entire life, winning the Olympics, and they hand you a basket of dried fruit. It really highlights how much they revered that dense energy source. And of course, there is a myth attached to it.
There is always a myth in ancient Greece. They used myth to explain the origins of the things they depended on most.
So what's the story for the fig?
In one prominent story, the goddess Demeter, who is the goddess of the harvest, is mourning the loss of her daughter Persephone.
Right, who was taken to the underworld.
Exactly. In her grief, Demeter wanders the earth, and she is taken in and offered hospitality by the people of the region around Athens. To thank them for their kindness during her darkest hour, she gifts them the very first fig tree.
Wow, so the fig is permanently linked to fertility, to the harvest, and basically to the favor of the gods.
It was a very sacred fruit.
And they weren't just relying on figs either. The sources round out their produce list with raisins, dates, grapes, and pomegranates. It really is a beautiful natural diet.
It is.
But let's connect some dots here. You have a diet heavily reliant on salted fish, brine cheese, and concentrated dried fruits. Plus, you're working outside in the hot Mediterranean sun.
You are going to be incredibly thirsty.
Exactly. You can't discuss a Mediterranean diet without discussing what they use to wash it all down.
Hydration was a serious issue. Standing fresh water is a massive gamble in the ancient world. It could easily be contaminated with bacteria or parasites, leading to dysentery and, well, death.
Not ideal.
No. So they needed a liquid that was safe, sterile, and provided calories for physical labor. We are, of course, talking about wine.
Wine. It's deeply woven into their daily survival, their social structures, and their religion. But the way they drank it would absolutely shock a modern sommelier.
Oh, completely.
The golden rule of ancient Greek wine was, you have to dilute it. You never drink it straight. I was reading the ratios in the sources, and they are wild. In the Odyssey, there is a mention of wine being served with a 20-to-1 ratio of water to wine.
Which sounds like slightly bruised water, honestly.
Right. Now, historical evidence points out that the everyday reality was closer to a 3-to-1 or maybe a 4-to-1 ratio of water to wine, but it was always cut. But I have to ask why. Was their wine just incredibly strong, or were they just lightweights?
It's more about how ancient wine was made. It wasn't the carefully filtered, temperature-controlled Pinot Noir you buy at the store today.
Yeah.
Ancient winemaking was a rough process. The juice was often left to ferment wildly on the skins, seeds, and stalks for a long time. It was frequently exposed to air, which means it would begin to oxidize.
Right, it gets funky.
And furthermore, as water naturally evaporated from the porous clay jars they stored it in, the remaining liquid became incredibly thick, syrupy, and very high in alcohol content. Sometimes, if it oxidized too much, it bordered on vinegar.
Ah. So it literally was like modern cold brew coffee concentrate.
Yes.
It's like how people today water down intense cold brew concentrate so their heart doesn't explode. You have to cut it with water to make it a drinkable beverage. They were doing the exact same thing with their syrupy wine concentrate.
That is the perfect analogy. They wanted the flavor, they needed the sterility of the alcohol to kill any pathogens in the water, and they wanted a slight caloric buzz to get through a long day of physical labor, but they needed to actually function.
Yeah, you can't safely swing a scythe or manage a 1,500-pound plowing cow if you're intoxicated.
Exactly. But beyond the physical mechanics, there was a deeply rooted social philosophy behind dilution.
How so?
Dr. Sean Corner, a professor of Greek and Roman studies, puts this perfectly in our sources. He notes that the Greeks diluted their wine to moderate and harness its intoxicating effects.
Moderate and harness.
Yes. To them, drinking undiluted wine was considered a savage practice. It was something they believed only barbarians did. Drinking pure wine was viewed as an act guaranteed to produce violence, disorder, and a total loss of reason.
And reason was huge for them.
Massive. For a society that was beginning to place a massive premium on philosophy, order, and civic duty, losing your reason to intoxication was the ultimate social failure.
So watering it down was basically a form of societal self-control. You get the hydration, you avoid the dysentery, but you keep your wits about you.
Precisely. And since the wine often tasted harsh or vinegary, they would frequently add honey and spices to it just to make it palatable.
That sounds pretty good, honestly. But here is the absolute best part about their relationship with wine. Are you ready for the ancient Greek breakfast of champions?
Let's hear it.
According to the sources, an ancient Greek breakfast sometimes consisted simply of slices of coarse bread dunked directly into a bowl of wine. That's it.
Just bread and wine.
So for you listening, it means that breakfast in 1200 BCE was essentially a very early, very carb-heavy happy hour. Just a quick wine-soaked piece of toast before you go plow the fields.
It sounds humorous to a modern ear, but again, it comes back to profound practicality.
Yeah.
You get complex carbohydrates from the grain, you get safe, sterile hydration from the diluted wine, and a slight caloric boost from the alcohol sugars, all in a meal that takes zero time to prepare. You eat it, and you're instantly ready for a day of intense labor. It was incredibly efficient.
It really was. We've covered the economic realities of meat, the chemical genius of brined feta, the biological necessity of dried figs, and the societal rules of watered-down wine concentrate. When we look at all these sources together, what is the big takeaway here?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the grand realization is one of incredible continuity. The Odyssey is famous for its magical potions, its mind-altering lotus flowers, and its monstrous banquets.
Right.
But the real Bronze Age diet, the daily reality of lentil stews, salted seafood, brined feta, dried figs, and diluted wine was incredibly grounded. It established a nutritional blueprint that has survived for over 3 millennia.
3,000 years.
Exactly. That basic menu directly evolved into the longevity-boosting Mediterranean diets that you are entirely familiar with today.
It outlasted the civilizations that created it.
It did. But it also leaves us with a really provocative final thought to mull over, especially when we look back at the source material's note on meat.
The sacrifices.
Right. Remember, meat was reserved almost entirely for ritual sacrifices. In 1200 BCE, eating meat wasn't a casual trip to the grocery store or a drive-thru. It was a profound communal connection with the divine.
It meant something.
It meant everything. Today, our food is abundant, fast, and completely disconnected from any sense of ritual. This raises an important question for you listening. When food is no longer treated as something sacred, what do we lose in our relationship with the world around us and with the meals we eat every day?